All right, everyone, this is the topic that we have. Now, let me explain how to write an essay like this, where you have to discuss the advantages and disadvantages, or let's say advantages and benefits, outweigh the disadvantages or drawbacks. So, first of all, the first thing that you do when you get your topic is that look at the question. Whatever the question is, have a look at it, try to understand it, and then you need to make sure that everything that you see is understandable for you. Like, let's have a look at this question now. In some countries, governments are encouraging industries and businesses to move to regional areas outside the big cities. So this is what my statement is. And what I'll do is I'll have a look at the keywords that I have here and I'll underline them. In some countries, that's the key word here, not everywhere, some countries. And it's not people themselves, it's the governments there. What are they doing? They're encouraging. So there's a difference between encouraging and forcing. So the governments are not forcing them, they're encouraging in two industries, and they're encouraging the businesses to move to regional areas. Now, regional areas are the remote areas, rural areas, non-urban areas, remote areas, areas which are far. So the government is encouraging in some the governments are encouraging in some countries. Industries are manufacturing units. And then what else do you have? The businesses. What are businesses? Businesses are service providing industries, like, for example, banks, schools, shopping centers. These are all businesses. Industries are manufacturing units, like factories which produce goods to regional areas outside the big cities. This is a big thing, outside the big cities, not in the big cities. So why is the government doing it? This is another key point that we need to look at if we want to understand the advantages and disadvantages. So this is a statement. Second thing is, do the advantages of this trend outweigh the disadvantages? Advantages of this trend. What trend? This one, that the government is encouraging them to go or move to the regional areas. So outweigh the disadvantages. Outweigh means is more in weight, or let me just fix this. Okay, so outweigh is like more in number, has more weightage, or has more benefits than the disadvantages. Of course, it's up to you now. If you think yes, there are more advantages of this, perfect. You say yes, the advantages outweigh the disadvantages. If you think no, there are more disadvantages, then you could say no, the advantages do not outweigh the disadvantages. So this is how it works. Now that we've understood the question and we have looked at the statement too, we are ready to actually plan the writing. So what are we going to do first is that we're going to prepare the advantages and disadvantages. So, for example, on one side we'll have the advantages, on the other hand we'll have the disadvantages. And it's quite easy, because if you look at these particular things, why would the government want, for example, factories and these businesses to leave the cities? It's pretty obvious. Now, you can write these ideas in the chat box, and some of you had written them before, so I'll keep them on the right. For example, that's a very good one from Osama. He says, transport issue for workers. That's a disadvantage. Okay, agricultural land is affected. That's a disadvantage too. Cut off from the concerning cities for daily needs. Yep, people would be cut off. That's a disadvantage. Waste of time to deliver or receive raw materials. Yes, that's true. Raw material would be a problem. Advantages: air pollution can be controlled. Low price. Large amount of land to build new units. Yep, true. Environmental pollution, true, Abdullah. Okay, carry on. To get logistics, Yeah, so there's so many problems and there's some advantages too. So for example, yes, somebody said that, Mariam says, employment facilities to those who live in the urban, like, yeah, that's true. Farhin says, noise pollution can be controlled. Yes, it can be controlled. Development, exactly, Ahmad. Sort of says to increase the opportunity of employment. Yes. Development of rural area, definitely. Traffic issues can be resolved, exactly. Yeah, you guys are coming up with nice ideas. So let's write them down here one by one. So for example, in the advantages, the first one is development of the rural area. So what we'll do is we'll just keep noting things. First one, development. Of the rural area. Yeah, that's our first one. And what's our second reason? What else happens? Yes, for example, the rural area will develop. There will be a distribution of wealth. So farmers will get an opportunity to get wealthy as well. Yes, waste would be treatment. Yeah. So for example, treatment plants. So for example, if the factory is in a rural area, we could have treatment plants there to treat the water or the waste that they are dumping into the environment or into the land. Yeah, treatment plants could be there. What else? The cost. So when you're writing down your ideas, you don't need to write the whole sentences. If you understand what you're writing, that's perfect. That's enough. Cost would go down. Yeah, what else? Cost will go down. Population density. Yeah, population density will go down too in the cities. That's true. And migration, like this is a good point that she has raised. Now that's number 5. And number 6, for example, if you see the migration to the cities, it's a huge problem. Migration to the cities is a huge problem and it will be resolved as well. Anything else? Yeah, that's right, Ahmad. You're right, exactly. Noise pollution, exactly. But in the cities, the noise pollution would go down. So you see, on one hand, we are looking at the advantages for both cities and the rural areas. Now, on the other hand, we'll be looking for disadvantages. So for example, because we already have like 7, that's more than enough. So if we look at the disadvantages now, what we'll do is we'll try to see what the disadvantages are. Okay, here we are. So the first disadvantage is logistics. Yes, everyone's talked about it. And logistics. Second, which I believe is a big one, is actually infrastructure. Infrastructure means roads, electricity, water supply, housing, schools, universities, colleges, hospitals, everything that you require. For example, fire brigade, you need a police station, so everything that is required will be missing. So yeah, correct. Infrastructure, all that goes into the infrastructure. So starting from the zero, well, starting from zero is an advantage and a disadvantage. If we start from zero, we're not starting the business from zero, we're building a factory from zero, from scratch. And it is a disadvantage because the cost, again, of building. There will be a cost that we need to pay. And for the building, businessmen don't want to spend money. They usually want to save money. So I don't think they would be really happy with that. But if the government gives them tax rebates or incentives, that's it. Rural area is also very cheap, so investor only see the money. That is good for, I think so, yes. Investors will save money. So yeah, that's actually a benefit, so we can't write it now. Chain supply will be affected. Yep. So, for example, supplies affected. True. There's so many people who provide them with, for example, supplies of raw material and all that. They will be affected. Yes, that's a very good point. Agricultural land. Okay, agricultural land will suffer because they will be building factories. Now, that one thing that can be done is if you build the factories in an area which is barren, let's say it's got no agriculture, and like, for example, there are some places in the world, like in Africa, where there's hardly any plantation and people are starving. So imagine if you spend money to build factories there, and the only problem there would be to get water supply from a different place. So like oil supply, if you could have water supply there, I mean, what oil is supplied everywhere. So if we could have water supply there, that's it. The fate of the area would change. And because the population is rising, we'll not have to get rid of so much agricultural land to housing and all that. True, true, true. That's right. So yeah, in many industrial zones, water supply is a problem. So this is something that needs to be resolved before moving the industries and businesses. Electricity, not a problem. It's easy to move. Transport issues, again, infrastructure cost, infrastructure I've written above, it will be a problem. But if the factories are moving, there will be new roads, definitely. And wildlife will suffer. Exactly, that's a big thing. Well done. That's a very important point, and a lot of people forget it. Wildlife will suffer. So yes, the wildlife will suffer because there will be human activity in the area or increased human activity in the area. So this is something that we need to take care of. So what else is there? Wildlife will suffer. True. So we got like 6 points there. And these are the disadvantages. Now, if you have a look, for example, at this point, the cost is going down. So yes, we have these problems that we've just talked about, but there are definitely advantages as well. So now please have a look at the advantages and disadvantages and make up your mind. Do you think there are more advantages or are there more disadvantages? What do you think, people? Make up your mind. Have a look at these advantages and disadvantages that have been written in front of you and make up your mind. All right. So most of you, I think, have made up your mind. And what I see more is people talking about more advantages. There are some people who said disadvantages. No, almost nobody. Everybody thinks there are more advantages. There are some. Sarah says there are more disadvantages. Fair enough. So perfect. There are like four people who think there are more disadvantages. Others are saying there are more advantages. There's absolutely no compulsion. You can choose either way, and both answers are right because this is how it is. So you've made up your mind what you think about this particular thing. So we will keep these things that we have as the base for our writing. So now we have advantages and disadvantages. These both will help us in our body paragraphs. So first thing that we need to write after that is the introduction. Now, when we start writing the introduction, let me increase the size of it a little bit, if it is possible. Is it? Okay, no, that's fine. So the first thing is introduction. Okay. And in introduction, you have three things. Okay, the first one is paraphrase the statement. Okay, I'll explain it to you what it means. Number two is answer the question. Number three is critical balance, like we talked about it in our first class as well. So paraphrase the statement. This is the first thing. Let's go one by one. The second one is answer the question. The third one, critical balance. So if you have a look at the question here, in some countries, governments are encouraging industries and businesses to move to regional areas outside the big cities. If you have a look at that, you need to say the same thing that you're hearing, like in some countries, governments are encouraging industries and businesses to move to regional areas outside the big cities. You have to say the same thing, but in a different way. Okay, so just think over it. You want to say the same thing, but you don't want to use these words. These words which are given here, you're not going to use them. Say the same thing that you see here, but in different words. So give it a try. Okay, I'm sure you're doing quite well. Look at these words and try to find some synonyms, some words which are different. It's always a good idea to start with a gerund. Gerund is a verb plus ing. So now what I would say, for example, here is relocation or relocating or relocation of manufacturing units and service industry to rural areas is incentivized by the governments or by the states around the globe. This is the paraphrasing of it in some countries. So multiple states around the globe are incentivizing the relocation of manufacturing units and service industry to rural areas or uninhabited areas away from the metropolitans. After that, you have to answer the question. Do advantages of this trend outweigh the disadvantages? You should use your own ideas, knowledge, and experience to support your arguments with examples of relevant evidence. So do the advantages outweigh the disadvantages? Okay, some of you are facing problem with the sound, some of you are not. So if you have a question, just write in the comments, please. Okay. All right. Just a second. Okay. So we've had a look at the introduction part. So when you do the planning, in the planning part, you could think of the examples as well. So for example, for the advantages, we could talk about the example of, let's say, Bangladesh, a country which has moved the industries to rural areas. As a result, the whole country has developed, and their GDP is now the highest in South Asia, I think. And it is from being really low down the order to getting that high up. So I think it's a good change that they've made. The disadvantages, for example, you could talk about the amount of time it takes, for example, in your country, in your area, to move from your city to a remote area and how few the facilities are there. Try to generalize the examples. Don't go and talk about yourself too much. Try to write an impersonal essay. Impersonal means objectively, you're not going to talk about yourself much. So in the introduction, you paraphrase the main statement, this one. So you could say relocation of manufacturing units and service industry is being incentivized by the states, by a few states around the globe. And I believe it is a positive move, and its positives or its advantages will easily outscore the negatives or the drawbacks, though some may have a different opinion. Now, though some may have a different opinion is a critical balance that you are acknowledging that there could be an opinion which is different from yours. So that is critical balance. All right. So, and you have done the paraphrasing of the statement, you've answered the question, you've done the critical balance. So that's how it is. After that, you move on to the body paragraph. Now, what do you need to write in the body paragraph? So anybody who would tell me? So in the body, there are a few things that we need to take care of. The first one is you go with your ideas. Now, when you say ideas, in this case here, these ideas are advantages or disadvantages. So for example, if I like advantages more, I would go with advantages in the first paragraph. So what you do is you have a look at these advantages that you have and you try to put them down in one or two sentences. So how do you do that, for example? Such a move would bring prosperity to the rural areas by the redistribution of the wealth, which is now centered in the cities. And at the same time, factories would be able to reduce their costs of manufacturing and would be environment friendly because they could have treatment plants built in the new location. Though it would improve the rural area, the urban areas will benefit as well because the migration or the influx of population to these areas would reduce as well. At the same time, reducing the noise and the cost of living in the cities. Though, although all these things are beneficial, okay, well, we don't need to go into details of that. We've already talked about quite a few, so you can give a bit of detail if you like. A reduced cost and population density in the cities, I think, is a positive thing in the longer run. Bangladesh, for instance, is an excellent example of a country which has practiced that, and their economy and life standards are getting the dividends now. So what have we done? We've given the ideas. After the ideas, you explain. Number 2 is the explanation. So you explain the ideas if you want to. If your ideas already have explanations inbuilt, then there's no need to. Third thing that you need to do is to provide an example. Like we provided the example of Bangladesh here. Now this is your body paragraph 1. Body paragraph 2 is the same thing again. So what do you do in body paragraph 2? You give the same things, ideas, which in this case are going to be disadvantages. And you explain them. So you provide with explanation of those ideas. And the third thing is an example. So in here, you can talk about these things that we've mentioned here. Try to make them into 2 or 3 sentences. Explain them in like 1 or 2 more sentences, maybe 4, and then quote an example. So if you have like, let's say, 3 plus 2, 5, 6, 7 sentences, that's enough. Sentences, not lines. So make sure that you write precisely and not in so much detail. The last part is the conclusion. Because you've already talked about everything, all you need to do is to give a verdict that, keeping in mind the advantages and disadvantages, it is quite clear that the advantages easily outnumber the disadvantages. That's it.